could Lucy Letby be the victim of huge miscarriage of justice? Were these post-it notes the writings of a young woman in extreme psychological turmoil? Well, we can now speak with psychologist Emma Kenny. Emma, thank you so much for joining me. You've done this amazing piece today in the Mail. Would you just like to give us the summary of your thoughts on the matter?
Well, my thoughts on the matter are that as soon as I saw that particular set of notes that were brought in by the prosecution, and I completely understand why they were brought in, immediately I thought, this is therapeutic. So very often people in therapy will actually get you to do stream of consciousness notes, which just make you write down how you're feeling in that moment without too much thought, to give you an indication of where that person is. And if somebody's dealing with high-level trauma, or even just something as simple, imagine a teenage girl going through a really bad time and hating her body and writing things like, I am fat, I am stupid, and all the things that so many of us have said in our diaries. To me, when I saw it, I actually instantly put something out saying, this doesn't just seem like somebody who's writing notes. This has probably been suggested to her, or it's a therapeutic kind of catalyst for her to actually get something out regarding how she felt. And I think the problem is, when it's brought into court, you're dealing with a jury of really compassionate human beings who do not want to let somebody who's maybe killed babies walk free. And because of that, it's the leverage and power that's involved. And unless the defense does a very good job of putting out why this was done and why this was written and what this actually meant, and bringing in a counter regarding all the things of hope that she also wrote in her notes, I think it just is something that creates a real sway within the attitudes of the jurors. And indeed, I think it did.
I totally agree. I think there could be a miscarriage of justice. Of course, we'll have to see, because there's lots of people calling for some form of retrial. I know David Davis MP has been one of the biggest voices in politics on this, and he's written some very compelling pieces about why she might be innocent. Now, is it normal? I mean, I can't quite recall, so you might have to correct me here, but is it normal for people going through therapy to write these kinds of post-it notes? And I believe she may have actually been going through some form of therapy. Is that correct?
Well, I believe that she'd been advised to write down her feelings. So
that's
essentially,
right.
She'd been advised, maybe it was occupational health he'd suggested. And I would say personally, as a practitioner, no, I don't advise people to do it. Now, purely because I don't think that I want to reinforce negative thoughts about the self, right? So I happen to stay away from that. But I know lots of practitioners who would see it as a catharsis, and lots of people feel that they benefit from that catharsis. The big problem is that when you just select certain areas of those notes, of course it looks horrendously incriminating, and if you bring it in verbatim as this is a confession, this is an admission, then again it's incredibly compelling. And we have to remember, look, people might not like me saying this, but the judicial system is about winning. It's about being the defense or the prosecution and winning. That's your main priority. It's not necessarily about truth or lies, and who presents the best case tends to do very, very effectively. And my arbiter within this is not necessarily even to do with whether she's innocent or guilty. It's about reasonable doubt. Is there reasonable doubt? And unfortunately, I think that because the other side of this wasn't really effectively explored, i.e. this is a therapeutic paradigm, it's a way of people expressing their catharsis, it's a way of people dealing with very difficult feelings. It's why people write suicide notes and don't take their own lives. It's not because they didn't feel it in the moment. She may absolutely have felt responsible for the deaths. And I'm not saying that she was not, because that's not my job to do. I was not in court doing that. But what I can say is, I think there are some real concerns about the way that information was given to the jury as fact, which was not necessarily fact. And therefore, is it safe? And ultimately, I would say, no, it isn't safe. And when it's not a safe conviction, it needs to be looked at, because without that, we have a big problem with our justice system per se. And it's not as if these things have not happened before. There are many cases where some people have gone to prison.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it reminds me of the sort of times we all sort of blame ourselves for things that have happened that are out of our control, almost. It's like a human reaction to say, this is my fault. And of course, she would have been there. She would have overseen the deaths of these children. Now, listen, it might very well be wrong, and she is guilty. But who else potentially here could be, at least allegedly, be liable for being re-evaluated? Because there's been fingers pointed at the doctors at the hospital, the management of the hospital. This could be a really big case if it's re-blown up again. If there's some kind of retrial.
Well, I think the idea of scapegoating is something that we've seen many times play into the judiciary system, the legal system. You know, when people have huge organisations who don't want to be considered culpable, and certainly it's not great for the NHS to be seen culpable, but we know that they're sued regularly because they do things wrong. So, of course, you have a whole system that's based against an individual. The system is something that's very well thought of in the UK, and therefore, for the jury to imagine that doctors, for example, make horrendous mistakes and that children can die on their watch when they shouldn't, that's a horrible thing to imagine. As somebody myself who has lost somebody in such a way and has actually taken action against the NHS, these things do happen. It's very unpalatable, but it's reality. So I think that I understand the verdict, I really do, but I don't think that people have understood the intricacies and nuances of this case. It's very easy to say to yourself, look, she looks so sweet and so nice, which again is probably something that makes people feel like, oh, that's the perfect mask, you know, somebody who looks so sweet and so nice. And that can actually work against you as much as it can work for you in certain situations. But also, like I said, if your defence is not as powerful as your prosecution, you have a real problem. And right now there were experts, and this is another thing that juries have to deal with. As a jury member, you're a member of the public. You might have had no medical experience. And then all of a sudden you have these very confident, very superior individuals saying, this is exactly what happened. I am an expert. Now, we know that when it's come down to this case, new experts who are far more skilled in this area have come out and said that that's incorrect. We also know statisticians have come in and said, actually, the cluster effect does not mean that she is therefore guilty. But when you're in court listening to that, I guarantee for most of us, those experts feel compelling. We're brought with authority figures of doctors, for example, and yet we all know, let's just think about COVID, that if you're on the side of what they want to be said, you're brilliant and an expert. If you're saying something contrary to that belief system, you are a crank and you're a grifter. That's the way it works when you're working against big systems.
Absolutely agree with you on that. Emma Kenny, thank you so much for joining me. Very compelling stuff there. Psychologist Emma Kenny. Definitely worth a read of her piece in the Mail there today if you get a chance. Well, moving on, if you're in search of some holiday sun, here's the forecast for the top European destinations.